Well, good evening, IFL Nation, and welcome back to the lab. Can you believe that we're already here? It is the start of the 2024 playoffs in the Indoor Football League. We have had 19 amazing weeks of high quality, the best indoor football on the planet that we just got treated to, starting off with 16 teams, and now we're down to the last 8 who will compete starting this weekend for the chance at being crowned champions in the middle of August in the middle of the desert. I want to welcome you aboard. Thank you for taking some time out of your evening to indulge me in some of my analysis of the week that is to come in the IFL playoffs. My name is Alex Schuberth. I am an IFL contributor over for Sports Coast to Coast, which is a Pacific Northwest-based sports forum site that specializes in the coverage of the Indoor Football League and its member teams specifically. We've got team-by-team roster breakdowns all up to date, game previews, recaps, basically covering A through Z of everything that you would want to know as a fan of the league or a particular team. And I forgot to mention at the top, it is that time. It is that time of the week again. It is Wager Wednesday in the Indoor Football League. For those of you who are wondering, how do I get to Sports Coast to Coast? I've put a link in the description for you. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you have the chance. There's a lot of great content there, including my written version of this post. So with that being said, let's get the screen up here and again, reiterate, welcome to the playoffs. Whether you're a fan of a team that has made it to this point of the season, or maybe your team came up short this year, I hope that whichever side that you're on, that you're set to enjoy even more of the best football within the arena that there is to offer. We're in for a treat, fellas. This is going to be so much fun. First, let's talk about week 19. We talked pretty much week after week for the past month plus. We needed a great start, or a great finish, rather, to salvage the season. And that is precisely what we got this past week, with our slips turning in a 6-2 record. And with that, we achieve one of our year-long goals, which we'll cover in just a few minutes. And we'll go game by game as well. I put some spoilers in there as well. Arizona did us in a little bit, along with an unexpectedly fast-paced and frenzious fourth quarter that we'll again get to with our game-by-game recaps. We'll go over some season-long trends as well for both bet types and specific teams to evaluate how did we do on everything now that we have a full season's worth of games under our belt to try to rate our performance on. Once we do all that, we'll get into predicting the first round, the conference semifinals, whatever it is that you want to call this round. We've got 4 fantastic games on the docket, and they're all spread out at different time windows. We have a Friday game at 8 Eastern, a Saturday game at 7, a Saturday game at 10, and we'll wrap things up with a Sunday nighter at 7:05 Eastern. So fans of the league will get to watch all 4 games without having to worry about any overlap. It's going to be amazing. We'll make our single game bets, and then we'll get to a 3-leg parlay, our final attempt at one on the 2024 season. And this has been an adventure with, unfortunately, not many rewards. We're getting a bunch of legs right. We're getting more legs right than not. We just didn't happen to arrange them in complete sequences of 3 as often as we would have liked. So we'll see if we can get one last win to wrap up 2024. And once we cook that up, we'll go to the futures forecasts and trends And we'll take a little bit more time tonight than we have on previous Wednesdays discussing who are the 8 teams, what are their payouts for a championship win, and what would be my recommendations to place your money on which teams, based on a playoff simulation that I ran over the course of this week leading up to tonight. All right, week 19. Let's get down to brass tacks here. We'll start off with our week opening game. This was Friday night between the Massachusetts Pirates and the Tulsa Oilers. And another example of the final week of the regular season having a bit of a wacky game script. The Oilers started off this one absolutely blazing both sides of the ball. They got out to an early 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. And at that point, the Pirates thought, to heck with it. Let's call off the dogs. Let's prioritize health in advance of the more important game that we know is coming up next week. We don't know who we're going to play. We don't know what seed we're going to be. But that doesn't matter. We just want everybody healthy. So we pretty much got 45 minutes of the Connor Dagenhart show at quarterback. Didn't really see much of Isaac Zico in this game either. It was his first game back from his second stint on IR, but he only had 1 catch for 2 yards. So it was mostly decoy, get reps in, get yourself mentally ready for next week's contest. But this game, the Oilers won convincingly, 44-24. Second consecutive year where they wrap up with a home win to close things out. Couldn't have happened to a better fan base that had just shown out wire to wire throughout all 8 Oilers home games and got some healthy representation on the YouTube chats for most of their away games as well. So big props to the Oilers. We can only hope that for them, the upward trajectory continues into 2025. Regarding forward momentum for 2025, how about the Jacksonville Sharks taking on the Quad City Steamwheelers? And entering this one, the Steamwheelers knew that the Pirates had lost their game, which meant that number 3 seed was up for grabs. Jacksonville was having none of it, though. They took a 14-point lead in the first quarter, forcing Quad City into catch-up mode, and they came back reasonably well. They eventually tied the game up late in the fourth. They got a defensive stand, and that propelled them to an opportunity at a potential game-winning field goal to get them to that number 3 spot. And with that, a non-zero chance of hosting a playoff game in the Eastern Final. What came over in the final 5 seconds of that game was outright disaster for the Steamwheelers. Not only did Kyle Kaplan's 48-yarder came up short of the mark, but it fell into the hands of the returner Tyler King, and he took it all the way back as time expired, making up for probably the most amazing finish to a game in the IFL this season. The Sharks winning 43-37. The Sharks finish off strong. They wrap up their regular season, their first in the IFL, with a record of 5-11. Quad City stays at 8-8. They are the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, and that nets them a trip to Green Bay later this weekend for that single elimination playoff matchup. One of the games in the Lone Star State, the Arizona Rattlers, with a playoff berth on the line, taking on the San Antonio Gunslingers. How impressive was Arizona's defense in this one? Pretty much an average unit throughout the whole season, tasked with limiting the second-ranked offense in the IFL, the San Antonio Gunslingers. Absolutely tall task, and they met it with every bit of conviction and clutch factor that you would expect from a Kevin Guy-led team. The Rattlers distanced themselves in the fourth quarter. They did just enough on offense, and they blitzed out to a win on the road, 41-34, clinching their spot in the playoffs. It is the 15th consecutive season across the IFL and the AFL where the Rattlers have qualified for the postseason. A crazy impressive accomplishment. As for the Gunslingers, they wrapped up the season a very respectable 500 for their first season in the IFL, and also having to play around what had been one of the leakiest defenses in the league. Out in Sioux Falls, the Green Bay Blizzard playing the Sioux Falls Storm. The Blizzard with an opportunity to grab an all-time high in regular season wins with 13, and an opportunity to clinch the number 1 seed in the East for home turf advantage throughout the whole playoffs. And looking at the final score, this is pretty much everything that you would expect from the prototypical Green Bay Blizzard game that we've been accustomed to seeing in 2024. The running game was firing on all cylinders. E.J. Burgess had an incredible game as a receiver, catching 9 balls for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. He low-key could be an Offensive Rookie of the Year candidate. And that defense limiting Sioux Falls to just 30 points total on the game. This was about as convincing of a win as you could expect from a team that's looking for that championship. Green Bay winning 51-30. Again, they clinched the number 1 seed in the East, which will pit them against Quad City in round 1. Iowa at Frisco, the Eli Mack game. And without getting too much into the social media sensation and his involvement in the game, really what a doozy this one was. The Iowa Barnstormers, having already been eliminated from playoff contention, they went in and played a very respectable game against a red-hot opponent. They were actually almost leading at halftime. Prior to a Frisco score just before, Iowa actually held a 1-point lead. And the Fighters, with how absolutely insane offensively that they've been, they just continue to run up the score, and Iowa couldn't do that much to catch up. Backed by another really good MVP caliber performance from TJ Edwards, the Fighters get to 13 wins with a 59-47 victory. Frisco, on the wrong end of the tiebreaker, sets them to the number 2 seed, where they will play Massachusetts in round 1, while Iowa finishes the season 5-11. In the desert, the Tucson Sugar Skulls putting an end to their season with a game against the Vegas Nighthawks, one that did get a little bit interesting, especially near the end of that first half. Tucson putting together a couple of scores late in that second frame, which got them to within 10 at the half. But then they could only muster 1 touchdown the rest of the way. Vegas's defense, exemplary job of limiting Tucson in the second half. And it is Vegas getting the win, improving their record to 11-5, while Tucson tumbles to 2-14, a league worst mark for 2024. That game ending in Henderson 49-25. Obviously, with Vegas winning, that does get them to the number 2 seed as a result of the next game that we'll go over. The Bay Area Panthers and San Diego Strike Force. And honestly, we were expecting the Battle of California, as invigorating of a series as that has been through the first 3 games. Just unfortunate out of circumstance, we didn't really get that in this game. Neither team dressing their starting quarterback, prioritizing health for the playoffs. And Bay Area, they may not have started all their players offensively, but defensively, they kept the same exact mentality as we had hoped that they would for our pick. In a close game, very low scoring. Bay Area getting a late touchdown to close things out. The Panthers get to 13 wins as well by beating San Diego 30-20, which coincidentally sets up a rematch between these two teams at SAP Center on Sunday night, with the Panthers as the number 1 seed and San Diego dropping down to number 4, which, by the way, is where I had predicted them to fall in my preseason prediction post. Check it out if you don't believe me. And finally, the Sunday game, which ultimately bore little consequence as far as the playoff picture went. Northern Arizona and Duke City, each playing game number 16 to close their ledger on 2024. And that says loss right there. I'm going to tell you exactly why we lost this wager. The game had 66 points combined in the third quarter. And then the last 15 minutes saw 51 points. As the teams, rather than half-heartedly playing out the string, they actually put on quite the show, which ultimately is a really good thing for the league, but not really good for our bankroll. But this was a game that really, Duke City was the more invigorated team, and the final score reflects that. The Gladiators, they've been working hard all season long, not necessarily getting the results as often as they'd like, but they get the last game of the season to go their way. Final score 69-48. Duke City gets their third win of the season, while Northern Arizona wraps up their roller coaster emotional ride of a season at 9-7, unable to make the playoffs for the first time since their inaugural season, where they wound up with just one win. So now let's talk about the spread, over-under, and money line bet type analysis. Our spread bets and our over-under bets as a whole, each one above 500, which is right where we wanted to be when everything was all said and done. We had our most success picking underdogs, fact that we really started to take advantage of once we realized, hey, there's a lot of money to be made with picking underdogs on the spread. They won about 57-ish% of the time, I believe, on the season. The fact that we nearly got 66% right is pretty lucky, to be honest. But there was an element of play there where we did think critically about it, made shrewd selections, and capitalized greatly on it. Our over picks and our under picks were both above 500 as well, granted each by just a game, but all the same, still contributes to us meeting our goal. The only bet tap that lagged behind this season, one that we really hit the nail on the head last year, was the money lines. In particular, our underdog bets just did not come through the way that they did a season ago. That really is the feast and famine nature of money line betting in general, whether you're going with favorites or going the bold path with picking the underdogs. But add it all up, we have a record where we won 64 of the 128 bets that we placed, exactly half. But because of the two pushes that we had throughout the season, we can say once again, for the second year in a row, our regular season record is above 500. And we can see with that 3-leg parlay tracker down there, third consecutive week hitting 2 out of 3. Just no luck with San Antonio trying to will their win into existence. So close, but no dice. And as this shows, from week 14 onward, we really made some serious ground. Trying our hardest to get back up to net gain territory on the season. We got fairly close, all things considered. And had it not been for a rather unlucky week 17, we may have actually gotten there. Recall that week 17, we had at least 3 wagers that lost that could have very easily won on the final play or the final drive of the game. And none of them happened to go our way. I think I wrote in the post as well that week that we could have gone 5-1 and won that week. But that's how it goes sometimes in the IFL. it is very hard to win in this league. And anytime that you do, I've learned that you cannot take that for granted. This year was a great example of that. And there's our net gain / loss by the dollars and by the ROI percentage. We were down as low as negative 13% this season. And we were able to claw our way all the way back up to very close to even. So we were on the downside financially, but the plus side on the record, all things considered, the end of this season, the third trimester, you call it, was a resounding success. And I am very happy with how it turned out. All right, now to talk about some of the yearly results. The first one may come as a surprise to you, but the unders actually outperforming the overs by a very slight margin for the second year in a row. Obviously, with it being that close, there's not really a substantial advantage where you can say, generally speaking, the under is better than the over. No, it's really game specific, matchup dependent, and honestly, situation dependent. These past 2 weeks alone serve as a great example of this. The unders 11-3 since week 18. So if you had bet strictly unders in every game, you'd be up 7 units right now, whatever unit that you decide to bet, $10, $20, what have you. So in total, we had Bay Area and Tucson hitting the under 75% of the time this season. The Pirates, Blizzard, and Gladiators also under cash-making machines at around a 63% clip at converting unders on the season. On the flip side, Frisco, 75% to the over. Sioux Falls around 68%. The Gunslingers, Wranglers, and Barnstormers, also a 63% conversion rate when betting overs. And those are trends that we really tried to leverage heavily as the season progressed. And I feel like we did a fantastic job at doing just that. Spread trends. This is going to be a big talking point throughout the offseason, particularly with the sports books. This is the second consecutive season where the underdogs covered very convincingly as opposed to favorites. They won 58% of the time this season, and last year, 59-44, good for a 57% win rate. So if we had spent the entirety of this season betting nothing but underdogs on the spread, we may have had a rocky start through the first 5 weeks, but on the season as a whole, we would have been up pretty considerably high. In fact, I'd be very willing to say that we would have beaten last year's 12% ROI. From week 6 on in particular, has been an insane heater for underdogs, at least when betting on the spread. In 14 straight weeks, underdogs have covered at least as often as favorites, which is a very surprising trend to look back on. So in terms of teams being unable to cover the spread, Sioux Falls and Quad City, the Wranglers and Pirates struggled as well. Teams that covered convincingly, Green Bay, San Diego, probably the two most surprising teams of the 8-team tournament field this season. And then, of course, our defending champion Bay Area Panthers showing their strength as well in that department. As opposed to last year, where road teams were woeful against the spread, away teams actually finished the season above 500 on the spread. So that's a little bit of a regression to the mean right there. Maybe 23's results were a little bit more of a mirage in that aspect. But very interesting trend to see nonetheless. Finally, we look at favorites who won 68-ish% of the time straight up. Last week was an even week for them. A very good week to bet on underdogs if you decided to go that route. In the DraftKings eligible games, if you had bet on the underdogs every time, You would have won twice as often as you would have lost, but not really have had a whole lot of net gain to show for it. Just a fraction of a percentage ROI, if that's the year-long route that you took. And here is our final count of our results by team. Clearly, we did a much better job at predicting things out east than we did in the west. For as much talk as we gave about Tucson being that team that really killed me this season, it actually turned out to be Northern Arizona in the end, with me getting just 5 of their games correct, including a surprising 0-6 over-under record. So note to self for 2025, I'm going to write it down on a Post-it note after I wrap up here. Never again bet on a Northern Arizona over-under. At least until we can find a trend that can help us at least put something on the board in that respect. So that wacky result kind of offsets our immaculate 7-0 over-under record that we strung together in Sioux Falls games. Granted, one of those wins was an extremely lucky last-second garbage time touchdown. Sioux Falls against Frisco. I posted a video about it on my YouTube if you want to take a look at it, relive it. Insanely wild ending sequence to that game. But on the season, yeah, teams like Quad City and Sioux Falls pulled their weight for me, as did the Pirates, Sharks, and Barnstormers. So very interesting kind of trend there with me struggling with the East and doing exceptionally well with the East, or struggling with the West. But yeah, that's how the team-by-team breakdown kind of shook itself out this regular season. So this is where we stand entering the 2024 postseason, looking forward to 2025. Our regular season results, we're up 9 units, and we have a record 15 games above 500. So our process that we have put in place, while it could look spotty in sample stretches, over the long term, we've done exceptionally well in backing our selections with good hard stats that have led us to victory more often than not. The opportunity ahead of us, though, for these next few weeks is that last year, we actually failed to get a winning record in the postseason. We had won 3 and lost 4. I think we actually split the first round 2-2, and the conference finals 1-1. Ended up losing our pick for the IFL championship game that season. But now we can set our sights on getting another first in this series to try to put together a winning postseason record, which, if all goes well, we could do as early as the end of this week if we get all 4 right. Here's to hoping. So I decided to bring this slide back as well. This was our initial goals page that I had created for the first edition of this series. As you can see, a lot of them, like we said at the top, were very lofty. But we did hit on spread betting and over-under betting generally being a good thing for us. I'd have to double check after the fact to see if financially they still wound up as a net gain. I'd be willing to say that spread betting did. Over-unders would be really close because I was only 2 games above 500 on that. And then the story of the season with the parlays, just couldn't put 3 together. We got 2 a bunch. We got 3 once. Just wasn't meant to be this year. Hopefully 2025 will come with a little bit of a regression to the mean if we maintain the same individual leg efficiency to where we see more weeks have 3 correct, even if that means we have some weeks with 0 correct. Because ultimately all it takes is 2 or 3 wins to potentially get you to even on parlays. So there is our playoff field A little nod to Tecmo Super Bowl for those of you who are classically trained, such as myself. Best football video game ever made, by the way. I will fight tooth and nail in that argument. But that is what the bracket looks like heading into this week, next weekend, and eventually the IFL championship game. So now it is time after half an hour, for our disclaimer section. The lines and odds that we're going to be using are going to come from ESPN, are going to come from DraftKings Sportsbook. If there are money lines not available, which I'm leading to believe is not going to happen, there should be money line bets available for every game, regardless of what the spread is. If last year was any indication. So if I have to refer to ESPN Bet, I will to fill in some blanks, but I don't foresee there being really any this season. So we're going to be looking strictly at DraftKings. That's how we've evaluated this whole year, this whole series. That's not going to change. If anything, we might look later at some ESPN Bet specific props, but I don't envision that we'll get into much detail in that. The series, as I said at the top, this is for entertainment, curiosity, to test our analytical, critical thinking skills. It's not meant to be a money-making scheme. There's no such thing as a lock in the sports betting world. All experts are going to tell you that. So if you do play, make sure you're of age, that you're in a legally jurisdicted state. If you want to tail my bets, you're more than welcome to, but please do so responsibly. Practice safe gaming habits, set a budget, risk only what you can afford to lose. And if you or a loved one is having a problem with excessive or problem gaming, there are lots of resources online that you can refer to get some help there. Haveagameplan.org is my example down there at the bottom. They've got great resources and interactive things that you can take in, teach you a little bit about gambling myths, refer you to additional resources, and all that good stuff. So those are the disclaimers for the week. And after nearly 35 minutes of talking about not really playoffs, let's dive in and start talking playoffs. We will start with the game that opens the postseason, the Quad City Steamwheelers and the Green Bay Blizzard, taking place on Friday night at the Resch Center at 8:05 Eastern Time. Fun fact, this line actually opened at 10.5 points, but it got bumped down to 9.5 points, which is the margin of victory that odds makers are projecting Green Bay to accomplish. The over-under is set at 86.5. Money line is available with Quad City plus 340 for the upset and Green Bay minus 440 for a straight-up win to advance. For Quad City, it's been a crazy type of season. They got here, they made it, wound up with an even 500 record that somehow contains wins against each of the other three teams in the Eastern Conference bracket. They've beaten Green Bay, they've beaten Frisco, and they took down Massachusetts. But you sprinkle in some puzzling losses along the way there, like Tulsa in their first meeting. They had that game against Jacksonville last week, for example. So here they are. They made it, but now they got to play arguably the best team in the league in Green Bay. This is a very interesting game to me simply because we do set it in a single elimination playoff nature. Quad City's going to have a tall task in front of them, whether it's Mike Merwin or Judd Erickson starting. or rotating based on the way that the past few games have gone for Quad City. The past few meetings between these two teams in the regular season, Quad City topped off at 37 points. And seeing as how they're going on the road to play the Blizzard in the postseason, I think it's going to take a herd of wild horses to get beyond that. As for Green Bay, they're coming in. This is going to be their first home game since June 14th. They wrapped up the season with a 4-game road trip, which I believe actually started in Quad City, where they surprisingly lost 37-27. But I fail to see a scenario where Green Bay does not win this game. They've just been so good at home throughout the course of the regular season. Even if you include their 4-point loss against the Pirates that opened up their season, the average margin of a game in a Resch Center is plus 16.5, favoring Green Bay. That said, as much as I love that stat in terms of backing Green Bay spread, I'm actually going to take a different path to this one that might surprise a lot of people. But I was looking at some numbers. Through the past 6 games, both Quad City and Green Bay are actually 5-1 to the under. And that is the play that I am going to make, even at a relatively meager number at 86.5. My model has this one averaging around 83, 84 per run. So something like 49-34 would be kind of like an expected score for this game. Quad City's defense has proven that they can limit Green Bay on a good night. They've done it twice already, limiting Green Bay to 27 points and 32 points in a couple of their meetings already this season. But again, this comes down to really the big-time challenge that Quad City's offense has in terms of getting points on the board in a hostile environment, one that promises to be rowdy against the number 1 scoring defense in the IFL. So this is my play to begin the postseason. Quad City, Green Bay, under 86.5. And now we go from one Eastern semi to the other, with the Massachusetts Pirates going to Frisco to take on the Fighters. This is another 9.5-point spread with bookmakers favoring Frisco on a game with an over-under of 93.5. The money line is Pirates at plus 300, Frisco minus 380. Interestingly, these two conference rivals met just once this season. On June 1st, a game that was a 52-48 win by the Fighters, which, interestingly enough, actually carries a very significant historic undertone to it. And you may know where I'm going with this if you've watched any part of my series or read along from last year. This was the venue back on June 1st where the Massachusetts Pirates covered on the road for the very first time in the legalized betting era. So, pretty interesting tidbit there. Obviously, the story for this one is going to be, is Frisco going to have a meltdown in the playoffs yet again? They've had three consecutive exits in the league semifinal round, one of which came to these very same Pirates back in the 2021 season. And if you look back at Frisco's franchise history, they've only lost 13 games in 66 tries, but 4 of those 13 losses have come from the Bay Staters. If there's any team that has the strongest historic precedent of taking this team down, it's the Massachusetts Pirates. And honestly, is that too far-fetched of a theory to think that they could pull off this win. I understand they're not playing their best right now. They finished the season 4-8, but this is the playoffs. We've got to expect both teams to be at their very best. And if Massachusetts plays their A game, I see no path to a double-digit victory for the Frisco Fighters. They probably win, but I firmly believe that the Pirates keep this close. So we are fully on board the ship. We are going with a pick that I have been maybe the biggest devil's advocate against pretty much since the very beginning. I'm taking Pirates on the spread. 9.5 to me seems like too much. And worst case scenario, just like we saw on June 1st, we can always hold that little bit of hope out for the backdoor cover in a situation that is do or die. If you lose, you are going home. So maybe this is the surprise of the postseason for you guys. Seeing Mr. Fade Pirates on the spread on the road, doing the exact opposite here and backing them to cover. By the way, they've only been underdogs 3 times this season. 2-0-1 against the spread when they've been the underdogs. And Frisco's not exactly the most ideal cover team either. So it's a bet that does make a lot of sense. And it's one that I think has a very realistic chance if history has taught us anything. So take the points on the Pirates, and we'll see if they can, at the very worst, hold the margin of defeat to single digits. Alrighty, now our attention travels west. A very intriguing matchup at 10:05, shortly after the end of Mass Frisco, between the Arizona Rattlers and the Vegas Nighthawks. And Vegas is laying 4.5 they're laying 4.5 at home. The over-under is 96.5. Arizona's plus 140 money line and Vegas minus 166. So how about let's follow up a game featuring the number 1 scoring offense in the IFL with a matchup between 2 of the other top 4 offenses in the game. Not to mention, Arizona's quarterback Dalton Snead won a championship in this very building last August. And Arizona's been probably quietly somehow the hottest team in the IFL to close out the season. They won 7 of their last 8. That only loss in that stretch coming to the same Vegas Nighthawk team that is looking for a 3-game sweep after taking both games in the regular season. There's so many good choices to go with here, and I couldn't really come up with a good argument against any of them. Arizona spread, you're looking at, hey, the Rattlers can win. If they hold it to a field goal, that wins anyways. And even money line is a sensible play. You can never count out Kevin Guy's players. The move that I'm ultimately going to make with this game, and it's the same logic that has kind of guided our pick for Quad City Green Bay. I'm going against the grain here. I am, again, going on the dark side of the over-under at 96.5. There is a reason for this. The first off is that I'm expecting a playoff game to where both teams are going to try to limit the number of opportunities that the other has. So it might not be like a risk-averse type of game plan for both offenses, but I would not expect to see any more than 1 or 2 combined turnovers in this outing. The other thing, too, is that similar to how Green Bay and Quad City have been terrific on the unders in the last 6 weeks, Arizona and Vegas have kind of followed suit too. The last 6, Arizona's 4-2 to the under. The last 7, Vegas 5-2 to the under. Rather surprising for two teams that are amongst the top 4 teams on offense in point scoring per game. But I think 96.5 is enough. It offers just enough wiggle room to feel good about making this selection. So that is going to be my play here. Arizona Vegas playing a closely contested game that stays under 96.5. And Sunday, 7:05 Eastern, version 5 of the Battle of California, the San Diego Strike Force and Bay Area Panthers, the defending champs, favored by 5. The over-under is 86.5. Moneyline is offered at San Diego plus 160 and Bay Area minus 192. What an insane rivalry this has blossomed into this season. Those first 3 games, out of your mind, with the first 2 being back-to-back, by the way. Margins of victory of 3 points, 1 point, and 1 point. And then obviously last week's game, which was kind of the black sheep of the bunch, with neither team trotting out their full allotment of players. But still very entertaining up till the very end, with the score really not doing justice as to how close that game was. And again, that was with both teams really trotting out their B teams. But there's a lot to like on this one from a betting standpoint. And the one that I like the most actually has to do with San Diego's performance when they've been the underdogs this season. They've been set as the underdogs in 8 of their games, so exactly half. They've covered in 7 of them. And now we actually get plus 5 to where a field goal margin of victory is not going to be enough to cook us. And with the first 3 games of this series, the more competitive games of this series, having a max margin of victory of 3 points, this to me totally might be the highest percentage direction to go. The other thing too about this series, the underdog is 4-0 against the spread, and they've won outright in each of the last 2. So not only does San Diego cover, I firmly believe that there is merit to picking them for the outright win against the reigning champions. We haven't had a repeat champion in the IFL since Sioux Falls made their 6-year run from 2011 to 2016. So you could argue history perhaps is against the Bay Area Panthers. And very much like Arizona Vegas, this is a matter of, do you trust the experience or do you trust the young guns playing in this for the very first time? So my choice here is backing the young guns, you could call them. I know Nate Davis and Rudy Johnson, amongst others on their team, are veterans of the league. But the franchise itself, this is their maiden voyage in postseason play. But I think they'll hold up very well, as they have in many of the other high-stakes games against their California-based rivals. So San Diego plus 5 to wrap up the week. All right, it's time for the 3-leg parlay of the week. So we've only had one of these hits so far on the season. My hope is that we can say that we had 2 by the time this is all said and done. I'm going to start things off by going with the pick that I said that I loved at the very beginning. Green Bay to cover by a double-digit spread. Whenever they've won in this building, it has been a no-doubter type of win. I want to say only one of their 7 wins at home this season was by a single point margin. And if that offense gets rolling against a Quad City defense that actually enters the season or enters the postseason as the most lenient defense of the 8 qualifying teams, assuming the defense does their job, no reason to think why they can't meet their average margin of plus 16.5 that we brought up earlier. So backing Green Bay, the number 1 team in the IFL at covering the spread, to do so once again to open up our lay. The second pick is going to come from Arizona and Vegas. And I swear you're going to laugh when I say this, but this pick was spurred entirely by something that had actually happened to me yesterday. I was on my way back home from work, just driving on my street, when suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, a hawk comes flying basically 5 feet in front of my car and across the street into the woods. It was the most surprising / majestic thing that I've ever seen in my life. And reflecting on it later that night, I was like, okay, this is clearly a sign from God. So I'm going to act on that and say Vegas money line at minus 166 for the Nighthawks to complete the 3-game sweep of Arizona on the season, which is something that I don't believe any team has done, at least in the recent past. I know there have been a few select teams that have taken down Arizona twice within the same season. But 3 times, I think you got to go back into the history books pretty considerably for that one. So that is how we will try to beef up the second parlay of our leg. And the third leg, act surprised, we're taking the under on a Bay Area Panthers game. Like we said during our season-long trend analysis, Panthers are 12-4 to the under. And this is a friendly enough number to make once again. And remember, San Diego, once upon a time, had 6 straight games this season go under. So they're not exactly the, we're going to go over every single game team ourselves or themselves. I really do like this pick. If Bay Area unders have taught us any indication, we're picking 3 really good bets that on their own have cashed each at least 68% of the time between Green Bay spread, Vegas outright, and Bay Area under. So using some of those trends is how we come up with this 3-leg parlay. We get ourselves to plus 465, which is above our plus 400 odds requirement. A $10 wager on this, if successful, would win us just about $56.51. So there's our treble, the final such one of 2024. Green Bay spread, Vegas money, San Diego Bay Area under. And now for our futures analysis. Here are our 8 teams ranked in order of who the bookies think is most likely to take home the hardware. And as has been the case for the past 2 months, Green Bay at the very top, unsurprisingly, Quad City at the bottom, projecting to have, without a shadow of a doubt, the toughest path to getting back to the IFL championship game for what would be the second time in 3 seasons. So, what are my favorite picks within this sample? If you're looking for something with a very high percentage of winning, combined with a pretty solid payout, I'd keep it simple. Look no further than the Green Bay Blizzard. In the playoff simulation that I ran, Green Bay was winning the championship about 31% of the time. The next closest, Bay Area at 20%. Goes to show how confident that the numbers think that Green Bay is going to take this thing all the way this year. They should have what projects to be the easiest game of the teams in the quarterfinal round, conference semifinals. And really, their only obstacle, Frisco in the Eastern Final, unless the Pirates upset them. And then whoever they face out west, which, again, one of their criticisms, there are very few criticisms, they haven't played anybody in the West yet. Despite that, I'd still rank Green Bay as the favorite against any of those four Western Conference-based teams. So Green Bay plus 220 is my favorite pick as far as increasing your likelihood for a victory. My favorite pick based on value, however, is the Vegas Nighthawks at plus 650. Obviously, having home field helps for that first round matchup against Arizona. Somewhere where the Rattlers, I believe, actually haven't won yet. Maybe they got one in Vegas's inaugural year in 2022. I'd have to take a look. But Vegas has had success against the Rattlers either way in the season series. And if Vegas does string together 2 wins over these next couple weekends, they're in the IFL Championship. Guess where it's being played? That's right. Lee's Family Forum, their own backyard. They will be hosting the IFL Championship if they make it that far. And I believe that's going to be so valuable to the Nighthawks if that's the scenario that pans out. So really, unlike any of the other teams, all they need is 2 wins to clinch home turf for the biggest game of the season. You could bet $15 on this right now, and if the Nighthawks win the championship, you're up $112. Terrific value, and let's say Arizona does come up short against Vegas. If you happen to get cold feet about it, maybe they play Bay Area in the first round or the conference final. Maybe you go with that cash out option. And then a sillier one that I thought of that might be valuable to the superstitious folk out there is the Bay Area Panthers. For the past 2 seasons, the team that has rostered Craig Peterson, the kicker, very famous kicker, for the IFL championship game, has won the championship. Peterson did so with the Panthers last year and with the Wranglers the year before that. And seeing where he's on the Bay Area Panthers currently, simply from that track record, Bay Area is a pretty solid pick. Plus 360, also some pretty solid odds as well. So those are some of my thoughts on the futures. And that is going to be the way that we wrap up our longest episode, surprisingly, of Wager Wednesday on the season so far. I thank you once again for taking some time hearing me out on some of my picks. And of the 4 to go, hopefully we get some winners here. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great night. And I will see you at the cashier.